important feature inside, if you look at the screen, are the structural gaps. So it's the parts of the network which could be connected but are not yet. And usually this is where new interesting ideas are hiding. The way that it works is that it takes a text, and then every word becomes like a node. Every co-occurrence of the words is the connection. So for example, here the word structure is connected to the word general, and so we have the co-occurrence, and the scan happens in windows which contain 4 words at a time. So then you have a pretty nice general idea of how the discourse and the narrative is connected inside the network. And then based on this graph representation, we can identify what are the main topics inside. So what are the most influential elements based on between a centrality or on the number of connections or degree in the network. And then using community detection algorithms, we can also see what are the main topical groups, which are identified with different colors here on the graph, and how they're connected as well to each other. So this is how it works in a nutshell. On the front page of Infranodus, you can always find a short scientific paper that explains the algorithm in detail in case you're interested, or if you want to use it in your research as well. So we will just wait for some people to join in, and I will stop sharing for a moment and then turn it on again so that we can have all the information we need here. Okay, so as I mentioned, use the chat if you have any questions, or the Q&A section. And I think we will begin here. So today I wanted to demonstrate how you can use Infranodus for introspection and research. That is somehow a special topic in a way, because introspection in this case means how you find out more about what you're actually interested in yourself. And then research is how do you develop it into something that could be interesting for others. So that's how I see it. First, how you can understand your interests and yourself better using this approach, text network analysis. And then how you can also develop something that you personally find interesting and make it interesting for the others. So that's why today I'm going to show how you can analyze your own content using some of my personal examples, and how you can then analyze the external context and see how you could somehow fit what you're interested in or what you're thinking about into the public discourse in a way that would be relevant both to you and to the people outside. So let's begin. First of all, I will show you one feature that some of you might already know, but I'm going to demonstrate how it works. And I will also explain some exciting new developments that will be soon introduced into this functionality. So I'm talking about the live ideation tool, which is an app available here. If you click here, then you will be able to see how it works. And basically, it's this function here at the bottom of the screen, which is giving you an advice on what you could do next to the ideas that you're writing about. So first, we start from a clean sheet of paper, and I will demonstrate how you can use Infranodus and the text network visualization in combination with this tool here to help you generate new, interesting ideas in relation to your research. So first of all, I will start from a simple phrase, just something that comes first into my mind, and that will be one of the topics that I'm interested in at the moment, and that would be how to perform fractal analysis of networks. Okay, so I add this into the system. As you can see, the recommendation engine is already proposing me a new idea. Add some more data, preferably different to analysis fractal network, to get some interesting insights. So it's just basically asking me to write something else. So for example, I can say that, okay, the the reason why I'm interested in fractality is because it can be used to estimate the dynamics of narrative or of a text. So then I add this in. As you can see, there is a new advice appearing here. Once you inspect the graph, check the Essence tab in the Analytics panel. It's here to see if you can reveal some interesting patterns there. For instance, estimate dynamics narrative and perform network fractal. I can actually click on those squares to see in which context they appear. As you can see, I see the statements then where these ideas are mentioned. And what it's proposing me here is to think of the connection between estimating the dynamics of a narrative and network fractal analysis. Okay, so then I can continue. And by the way, just to explain you the way it works is very simple. It looks at the graph itself and tries to notice what are the parts that are not connected yet. So in this case, you see it's this part, which is one subgraph, and the other part, which is here. So it's always proposing you to make new connections if your discourse network is disconnected. And if it was too connected, it would always propose you to think of a periphery, to think of the new ideas. So a way to interpret it is that basically it's always trying to find some kind of ecological balance in your thinking. If you are all over the place, like I am now because the idea is not yet developed, it's going to recommend you to connect ideas together so you can make them more coherent. And if you're too coherent, if you're too much focused on one or two topics, it's going to advise you to think of something else, to expand your horizon, to go beyond your comfort zone, so to say. So this is how this recommendation system that you can see here works. And you can always also click next and get another advice. So if the advice that it's giving you is not stimulating enough, then you can always click proceed, and then you will be able to see what it recommends next. So in this case, we don't yet have so much data, so let's focus on this here. It's proposing us to think of the connection between the cluster on fractality, so why I'm interested in fractality, and how to perform network analysis and how to analyze a network's fractality. So I can say that the reason why it could be interesting to analyze how fractal network is that I'm not focusing too much on making well-formed sentences yet. I will show you why, because then we will make another iteration where we will try to write this text in a more coherent way. But for now, I'm just saying that it can show us the dynamics of discourse evolution and reveal if there is a principle that is reiterated both on the smallest scale and on the big scale as well. Okay, so then the graph gets expanded. I get a new recommendation. I get a recommendation to think of the connection between this revelation that happens once you reiterate and estimating dynamics. So I can say that maybe once I can measure a text's fractality, I'll be able to see what kind of dynamics it has and adjust it accordingly, so I can make it possible to develop a discourse better. This is actually a real topic I'm thinking about as a way to implement an additional algorithm into the recommendation system here for this tool here that we're using right now. So then it's proposing us to take a look at the graph and see if we detect interesting patterns and notice interesting relations. So for example, those topical clusters, dynamic fractality and network fractal show. So what is the connection between how a fractal network can reveal something about the discourse and the adjustments that we can make between them? Okay, so I can deselect this and write more. For instance, if the discourse has low fractality, that means it's always reverting to a mean. So from the viewpoint of text network analysis, it means we're constantly going through the main terms. If the fractal dimension is too high, then we're too focused on the periphery. Okay, so then we have some more discourse here. We see we have a different cluster, and here it's proposing us again to think of a possible connection between those two topics. And if we click proceed, then there are two more topics and so on. So basically, this is how it works. You reiterate through the advice that Infranodus is giving you using this feature here, clicking proceed, and basically following the instructions. So the reason why we introduced this functionality is because not everyone knows how to work with the graph. So this is basically leading you through some of the best practices that you could actually do to analyze a text graph and to be able to extract some valuable insight from it. So here you see it's focusing on the structural gap between these two topics, for instance, and helping you to make a connection between them. By the way, if you click here in the analytics panel, it's doing the same thing. Reveal the gap, then you see the statements to link here, and it's proposing you to think of a connection between this sentence, how to perform fractal analysis, and the reason why it could be interesting. So it's proposing you to develop this idea a little bit more, how it could be interesting, what it could be used for, and so on. So I can even say that this sort of analysis could then be implemented into the recommendation algorithm for end users, or also be used to extract features for machine learning algorithms. Okay, adding this sentence. As you can see, the machine learning stuff is actually a new cluster now, which is here. Maybe I can highlight it here as well. So that means that soon Infranodus is going to recommend us to also develop that and to think of a connection with the fractal dimension and so on. So then it's going to get more technical. This is basically how it works. Feel free to try to use it with your own ideas. Just start writing freely and then, continue exploring the advice that it's giving you and how it can help you develop your discourse. Soon we will implement OpenAI text generation tool. So there will be a version of this app which will not be proposing you to make connections between clusters, but rather using the real sentences, well-formed English sentences, to give you a recommendation. So it's like you will be talking to a personal assistant who is helping you develop your ideas. I'm very excited about this feature, and I hope it's going to be implemented in the next couple of months. So then it's going to be like an intelligent chatbot that you can use to talk to yourself and to extract some interesting ideas from your own mind. Now, the next step is how can you take it further? And by the way, for those who just joined in, you always have the chat and the Q&A section in Zoom. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask them. I'll be happy to answer as we go along. Or if you have any ideas, for the functionality of the features that you would like to have, I'm always really interested to hear about those as well. So the next step. Now we created a network of what we're interested in. So that was kind of like an introspective exercise that we are working with right now. I had some ideas about fractal dimensions of networks. It's something new for me. I just needed to write it down, to represent it as an image, to have an overview of what I'm thinking about, and to stimulate myself to think further about this topic. Usually I wouldn't stop here, but for the sake of brevity, I will stop at this point. although normally I would spend another half an hour writing in and using the advice and so on. The next step is going to be to actually see how we can integrate it into the existing discourse. And to answer the question of Mark Kudre in the chat, who's asking if we will be using the GPT-3 dataset, yes, with the OpenAI, with their API, it's the only option. You have to use their own dataset of GPT-3. But I'm also planning to take an open source GPT-2 model and train it on some specific subsets of text to see if it can provide better recommendations. And Timo is asking, could you please expand on the upcoming chatbot feature? I mean, yeah, not to talk too much about it because you will see when it will be implemented how it's going to work. But basically, as you can see here, now Infranodus is just recommending you to make a connection between the clusters of the network. So it's saying select the most influential nodes on the graph and remove them to reveal other important patterns. So I do this. This happens. And then it's proposing me to think of a connection between this cluster and this cluster. So instead of being technical like this, which is also interesting because for those who understand networks, they also understand how it works and why it's asking those questions, we will basically feed this as a prompt into the OpenAI API. And as a result, it will generate a question. So instead of asking you what's the connection between text fractality, reason, and algorithm user feature, it's going to just generate a sentence. It's going to say something like, what kind of algorithm could you think about that could increase the fractality of the text? And then it's a much more human readable form that you can then use in your research, and you answer this question directly here, and then something else is going to happen, you know? So basically this is how it's going to work, more or less. Bosco is asking, hello, why did you start writing randomly, not fully meaningful sentences? You said you'll come back to it later. Sorry if I missed the answer. Yeah, it's just because when I'm thinking, it's not always that I'm going to try to, you know, come back and make it sound right. Like I used 2 times is and is in one of the statements. So at this point, it's better not to focus too much on making it sound good. You just want to put in all the main keywords into Infranodus because it's those keywords that are actually visualized, as you can see here. All the words like has, it, is, are excluded. So you shouldn't care too much about making it sound right, especially if you're not a native English speaker, even though Infranodus works with other languages. But for example, it's not working with Serbian or other languages like Japanese or Chinese, for example. No, so you will be writing in English probably, and basically that means that not always you will be able to make it sound right. So the idea here is that you start writing freely as you want, and then the next step is going to be make it sound right. But this I will show as the third step after the second step that I want to show now, where you analyze the existing discourse. Because what we will do now is that we will analyze the existing discourse on the topic. Then we will see what else we can integrate into our own ideas to make it more compatible with what other people are thinking about. And then I will show you how you can then turn it into something that will have a good narrative and sound right and so on. And Theo is asking if we can have a bit of explanation about the settings of Infranodus. Yes, if you write to me what kind of settings you're interested in, or if you just want me to go through all the settings, please let me know, and I will expand on it a little bit later. And Mark is saying that the conversion AI site is really good implementation of GPT-3 C3 set, and maybe a good resource for comparison for the work you're doing. I really love Infranodus and appreciate all the work you're doing. Thank you very much, Mark. It's very nice to hear this feedback. And I will check out the conversion AI for sure. Gonna write it down now. Okay, so now we will move on, and I will show you how you can analyze the existing discourse using this approach. So we were talking about fractal dynamics. So I go back into the apps. There are multiple ways of doing this, but I'll show you one simple one. And then I go into the Google app, And I simply type in fractal dynamics here to see, in English, I can use another language, to see what people are thinking about this topic already. What exists on the web in relation to fractal dynamics. What happens here is that it searches Google for these keywords, and then it gets the top 40 search results, visualizes them as a graph, so you can see what the existing discourse is talking about. And here we can see that, for instance, let's open the analytics panel here. We have something about long stride range. So I click on those nodes, I see that, okay, Tai Chi, training impact, fractal stride dynamics. Oh, this is interesting because I'm practicing something like Tai Chi, so this could be very interesting research for me. So I can open it in a new tab and maybe read and get some ideas from here. Then I can go back and see, okay, where else was this topic used? So something about the stride interval of human walking. So we see that a lot of research in fractal dynamics is based on detecting variations in the stride of human walking. Okay, so this can be interesting for me. And I can add it as one of the ideas to explore in the fractal dynamics. Can I take some of the methodologies or tools that are already used in analyzing human movement and apply it to human thinking? So that could be an interesting idea for me. Then I can go on and, for instance, click on these topics here. And the third one, scaling properties, fractal scaling properties of human respiratory dynamics. Okay, so also something about human breathing. So that can be interesting as well. And then I can open more topics here to see them all. There's also something about heart rate. Okay, so as I can see, when we talk about fractal dynamics, or when I search for fractal dynamics on Google, the main topics that I get are basically about human movement, gait, heartbeat, and breathing. So then I can say that, okay, this can be something interesting for my research. So I go back into my original text, and I can write that it could be interesting to explore the different tools and methodologies used to analyze fractal dynamics, human movement, heartbeat, breathing, and to apply them to human thinking, because the network represents the way that you think. So why not try to apply the same tools? And as you can see, we have a new cluster here. So this can be really interesting for us as a new topic of research. I can even use the graph manually now and try to make connections between disjointed clusters here. So for instance, here I just added something about human movement, which was the last sentence. And then I have another cluster here on the recommendation algorithm that will help the users of this tool of Infranodus think how they could develop their discourse further based on its fractality. So I can even say, okay, can there also be a recommendation algorithm for human movement? Let's say something detects human movement in a certain way and then provides you a recommendation for how you could move differently, or maybe more organically or naturally or in a healthier way using the same approach. So I can just write this in as an idea now, as this is an ideation stage. I don't have to focus on one specific topic. I can say that, okay, maybe the fractal measure of cognitive dynamics can also be used to recommend not only the new ideas, but also some different patterns of movement. And this is an interesting topic for me. You can also write Tai Chi here in brackets, because one of the other projects of Nodos Labs is called A2S, which is a movement system where we use a lot of dynamical systems theory as well. So this just fits really nicely into my research interests as well. Kimo is asking if it's possible to correct the input afterwards. For example, if I notice typos in my input, can I just edit the text, or do I have to delete and re-enter the input? Yes, you can edit it. You can just go here and for instance, can be used to provide a recommendation. I noticed that I used recommend, and in the previous one I used recommendations. It's better to use that, and then reset the graph. And as you can see, it's fixed now, and it connects nicely with the word recommendation. So this is how you do it. Theo is asking in the Q&A section, when you said Google search, it looks more focused about academic paper, right? No, it's not focused on academic papers. It's just that if you search for fractal dynamics on Google, it's probably not everyone is talking about this, so it took out a lot of academic research. But if you search for something else, then it will just show you what you normally see in Google. Instead of searching Google, would it be possible to search on Google Drive or other cloud storage? No, not yet, but we're working on implementing this feature. However, you could import your own documents and analyze them the same way. So I will continue. Another way to analyze the existing discourse is to use this very nice market niche app or CO app. It's basically two same things. This one is for search engine optimization, so it's to find the gaps in the existing discourse. But for people who are not familiar with search engine optimization, there is a lighter version of this, which is called Market Niche App, and I'm going to show you how it works. It's not only about marketing. So basically what you do is that you type in what you're interested in. So for instance, I'm interested in cognitive dynamics. And then I click Go. I can also choose the language and the market, but I will choose English and USA. And what happens here is that it imports Google search results for the search query, just like we had it before. But then it also tries to see if there is any search queries that exist in relation to this topic. So as you know, when you type into Google a search query, it provides you a recommendation what else people are searching for. So this is the second graph that Infranodus is importing here. It's importing what people who search for cognitive dynamics also search for. In this case, we see that they're searching for meaning, definition, something that's called for temperaments catalysts, interactional styles, stabilizer temperament. So some topics related to psychology and much more. And what's great about this tool is that you can see what people find when they search for cognitive dynamics, what they search for. If you click here, you see what they search for. But the best thing is that you can see how what they search for is different from what they actually get. So in this case, it's called niche insights, demand minus supply. So what people are searching for but don't yet find. And here is a very nice way to find out what are the gaps in the current existing discourse. So here we see that it's the temperament theory. This is something that people search for when they search for cognitive dynamics, but there's not so much information for that topic in the documents that talk about cognitive dynamics. So this could be interesting for us. I actually don't even know what it is. So there's a nice button here, a little shortcut with a magnifying glass. And if you click here, it will actually search Google to show you what this is. So it's a proto-psychological theory that suggests that there are different personality types. Okay, so this could be interesting to add some discourse on psychology to our fractal network recommendation tool and to explore it a little bit further. And maybe this would fulfill the gap that exists for the cognitive dynamics topic. Okay, and I can actually tag it as a sort of idea. You can also make tags, so you can separate the statements and then filter them here, you know. So this is another feature that you might find useful. Okay, I will look at more questions. Dmitry, does what people search for but don't find results actually show things that are no results for, or just an underserved topic, not enough results? Yes, it's an underserved topic, I would say, because if you search for this search query, temperament theory, you will find, of course, something on the internet, on Google about that. And if you search for cognitive dynamics, if you scroll to the 5th or the 6th page, you will probably also find something about these topics. But what this tool does is that it looks for what people search for if they search for cognitive dynamics. And as we could see here, they also search for these topics, but they just don't find so much results on the first pages of Google for the main search query, which was cognitive dynamics. So it just offers you a way to see what could be relevant to this discourse, but is somehow underexplored. So then you can write your own texts about it. And this is a great way to do search engine optimization as well. If you're writing articles that you want to appear at the top of Google search results, this is a really great approach to use, because Google will notice that you're writing about the main topic, which is called cognitive dynamics, but that you're adding something interesting about this topic, which is temperament. I think it was the theory of temperament theory. That's it. So it will notice that you're actually bridging an interesting gap in the discourse and push the results higher. We tested it multiple times on our own content for Nodus Labs, and it always worked. Another question comes from Robert. When you started with a single sentence, where do the semantic links come from, since they can't be based on frequency? Yeah, maybe I will show again how it works. Basically, you can even understand how it works if you select a statement and just follow the links. So for example, the second statement, or even the first one. So you see the way that Infranodus works. It removes all the auxiliary words like how, to, of. Then I will get the fractal analysis back. Okay, so here we have the cluster. And then it takes the first word. In this case, it's perform. Perform is connected to fractal, so this connection is made. Then fractal is connected to analysis. Analysis follows fractal, so they're connected. And then there is the network after. And so there we have a little cluster which was made based on this sentence. Then if you have the second sentence, the first word here will be reason. So here's the word reason. Then the next one is going to be the reason why it could be interesting. So interesting is the second word. Why it could be is not added into the graph. Then analyze, and then fractal. And as you can see here also, the connections of the words that are next to each other, they have more weight. And if the word is one or two words apart from each other, then the connection is going to be weaker. And then reason in this case is not connected to the word network because it's the next scanning window. So then we remove reason, and if you can see, then it's connected to network and we have another gap and so on. So this is how the algorithm works. Okay, we will move on now and see how we can add those ideas into the original text. So we have the text here, and as you can see, we added some of the ideas from the research that we just did, both on Google and on the Market Niche app. And we have a nice graph here with the dynamics as the central topic, and then recommendation, movement, human. So something about human movement and how we can develop a recommendation algorithm both for cognitive dynamics and for human movement based on fractal analysis of the data. Then something about the temperament theory, which is underdeveloped. As you can see, it's on the periphery. So that could indicate to us that we need to make more connections between this topic and the main part of the graph, as, by the way, the recommendation system here is proposing. So you see it's proposing to connect this to that. And we can even say, okay, so recommendation, movement, human. So how can human recommendation be connected to the different personality types? So maybe in this case, I would say that the recommendation algorithm could identify the personality type or even discourse type and recommend to introduce more variability to it, so we have more diversity in the discourse if needed, or vice versa. So here I'm kind of connecting just like with temperament theory and personality analysis. So here I'm connecting these two clusters, and as you can see now, it's more integrated into the main discourse. And now the word discourse also became more prominent. Then we also have this cluster here on the algorithm and the methodology and so on. So basically, this is how you would go through the graph. And also what's good here is that in this case, the recommendation system realized that your graph is to bias towards the following nodes: dynamic, discourse, type, and then it proposes us to develop the ideas on the periphery. So for example, again, human movement and fractal analysis. So how could we analyze human movement using fractals, and how it could relate to the main topics of cognitive dynamics in this case? I could write more ideas in and make more connections, and basically going through these iterations. This is how it would work. And if the advice is not stimulating, then you can always click proceed and show the next recommendation. And by the way, here, another interesting thing that this recommendation system does is that it proposes you to remove the most influential nodes from the graph, which is something you should be doing when you're working in this way, to reveal what are the patterns hiding behind them. So there I'm clicking proceed, it removes them from the graph, and then the whole constellation changes because now dynamic discourse type is gone, and we have more latent topics coming up in the discourse. So then we can really analyze it that way. I will answer in the Q&A section. So Robert says that the system has some lexical intelligence. Can it identify morphological similarity among words with the prefix com? No, not yet, because we're focused more on the connections between the words, but we're going to integrate entity detection and maybe some synonyms as well later. You already can connect the words that are like each other manually. If you have let's say network analysis and you want to make it one word, you can click here, and then it's going to create one node from it. So, and then you can also break it into two. This is also fine, but it cannot yet do it automatically. So basically, yeah, you would need to do it manually. And here you can also unmerge the nodes if needed. So if you want them to become two words again, reload the graph, then it's two separate words again. So this is how you could use synonyms now. I will look through more questions and then we go further. Daniel is asking, have a question about possible application of Infranodus. If the text that you introduce consists of a description of the geometry of an object and its many parts, for example, a description of how a mechanical machine is built, or how to assemble an IKEA chair, or even text from a textbook or human autonomy, will Infranodus provide a graph that represents the interconnected parts? Well, yes, I think that could be an interesting use case. You could feed all this data into Infranodus, either just by copying and pasting it into the graph using this feature here, or you could also make a CSV file and import it through the file importing feature right here. And then you tell Infranodus which column you want to visualize, and then it would show you the connections between the parts, probably. So if the same language is used, then you will be able to see patterns that appear in this discourse. And Nicole is saying, a bit left of field, how can I see all the questions that were asked previously, especially the one that you were not something with AI down? You mean, yeah, it's not possible to go back to the questions here, because all the questions it's asking is based on the current structure of the network. So it doesn't save the questions, and they would not make so much sense because it's usually based on clusters, and the clusters always change. So you would be able to see the words, but it would not be the words from the same cluster anymore, because I can add something else, and now the clusters will change because I make a new connection between those terms. For instance, here, I can even select them and make a connection like this, and then the whole clustering algorithm is changing how the nodes are aligned and what they belong to. Can we import a collection of academic papers and analyze them all together? Asks Trezo. Yes, actually, this is what I wanted to show next, is how you can also make use of the scientific database for a certain topic. So I used Google search before. We also use some search engine optimization tools. We also have scientific paper titles. And here you can analyze Pubmed data or also open access data from Core AC UK. I will use Pubmed in this case, write fractal dynamics, include everything, save it in a new graph, and what happens here is that it searches Pubmed for all the papers on fractal dynamics. If you don't know, Pubmed is a database of scientific papers on life sciences and biology and medicine, and then it gets the titles of those papers from Pubmed and visualizes them as a graph. So using the same principle, the words are the nodes, the concurrences of the words are the connections between them. Then you can see the graph. You see what are the main patterns that appear when you search for fractal dynamics on Pubmed. And at the moment we see that, surprisingly, there is quite some stuff about COVID modeling. So modeling the epidemics, then something about, let's see, the topics here, economic effect optimal, okay, and then variability, dynamics and decay of rates of time-dependent to cellular systems. So some papers on mathematics, heart rate variability as well. So if there were some interesting topics here, we could also add them into our list of ideas. What I'm going to add now is maybe this idea on using fractal dynamics analysis to analyze propagation in networks and how it could be applied to discourse analysis. For instance, can it be that discourse with a higher fractality will make it easier or harder to propagate ideas through it? So that could be an interesting research question for us to explore. This is how I integrate the results of the scientific paper analysis. Is there a limit for the number of results in Pubmed analysis? Yes, I think at the moment it's maybe 100 due to their API limits, but we're working to expand it. Although it's not so bad already, because you basically get the top results, and this can be interesting if you want to get a general overview of the topic. But of course, if you want to get in all the papers on a specific topic, this is not yet possible. But for an overview, it works pretty well. Okay. So we will move on to the next question. Would it be possible to visualize a transcript of a conversation interview where two speakers could be traced separately? Yes, you would have to add it into a CSV file. You make one column where you have the answers of the people and another column where you have the name of the speaker. And then you would get something like this. We actually have a case study on Nodus Lab's website about interviews. I think I can post a link after to the description of this video, but basically how it would work is that if you have an interviewer and he's saying, what's your idea on fractal analysis for network dynamics discourse, something like this. So we can call this interviewer, add a tag here, and then I don't particularly find this topic interesting. I'm more into ocean studies, something like this. And this is the interviewee. We add a tag. And what you will have is that basically you'll have one cluster or one part of the network that will be the questions of the interviewer and another one of interviewee. Of course, you don't want to make this manually. So if you're using Google Sheets, you just put in the column all the answers and questions, and in the other column, you put whether it's a question by the interviewer or if it's an answer by the interviewee. And then when you import it using the CSV analysis here, you say that you want to import the column with the answers, but the column to use for categorizing your data and adding the tags is going to be whether it's the interviewer or the interviewer. And then you save it as a graph, and then you'll have a nice graph where you will be able to separate the two and view them together. Okay, so another question would be from Crezo. If I have a collection of texts that I have already found, can I import them and analyze? Yes, you can also do this. If you save them as plain text files, you use this app here, Advanced Import, select the files. I think you can select quite a few. If it's MD files, so if you're using a knowledge management system, in the questions for the webinar, we had some people asking how they can build their own knowledge system using Infranodus. So this would be the answer for them, that you can export your files from your knowledge system, if it's ROM Research or Obsidian or Bear or IA text, doesn't matter. You export all your files and then you import them here, the Markdown files. I think you can import maximum 500 files if you're on the Pro plan. And then you can choose what you want to visualize, whether you want the connections between them, if there are connections, or if it's just the content or only the connections. And then you save it as a graph and you have a nice overview of all your scientific, of all your research and of all your files with the ideas that you have. ISIS is asking if there is a limit for the number of results in the Pubmed analysis. Yes, I think 100 at the moment. Could we get the service for a pre-selected group of articles? Not yet, but this could be possible technically. So please write back to me to this email and explain a little bit more what you would like to have, and we can integrate this feature because this is technically possible. Okay, so we move on from here and we go to the next topic, and that would be, in fact, expanding on what we were just working on. I want to show you also some interesting personal use of how you could use Infranodus as a diary, in fact. And as you know, there are many different ways of running a diary. For instance, one of the ways that I find useful is that you write what's good for the day, what was bad, what you would like to transform and to improve, and so on. And although this is quite personal information, I'm not going to show you any specific texts, but I'm just going to show you the graphs that I get and how I can use those graphs to analyze what could be changed. So for instance, here I have one graph which is showing all the stuff that I thought were good in the day, and I think I was writing it over a period of a few months. So, I liked when I was working on stuff and when it was good, and when I could also go to the nature and explore some spiritual questions and work with my body, do some movements. Also, practical aspects are important and so on. And then what I can do is to compare it with the graph that had all the bad things, like all the bad things that I didn't like. And again, it's the same thing here. I was writing down the stuff that I wasn't enjoying in the day. And here I can see that when it was too much of the practical stuff, was not so good. Always nice to have some creative work and, to work on research. And for instance, here, too much time at the computer was another topic. And so it's really nice because it gives you a very clear way into, showing you what kind of ideas you can have and, what you can change in the day, what works well, what wasn't working so well, and so on. But then the best thing about it is that not only you can see the patterns, you can also compare those two different clusters together. So for example, here we are comparing what was bad to what was good. So you have a graph comparison feature here. If you click on this icon here, then you see the differences between the graphs. If you click here, you see the similarities. So I will compare it now to what was good. So what was bad to what was good, and I will see the differences between the two. We see here that what was bad, but not in what's good. So there was something about focusing attention that was in what was not good, but wasn't in what was good. So for example, this is something to work on. Then we also have some stuff about yoga. I was not actually writing it in what's good, but I was writing it in what's bad. So probably it was that I didn't do yoga one day or something like this, but I didn't write it in what's good. So this is interesting because when I think what's good, I don't think about yoga, but when I think what I should have done but didn't do, I thought about yoga in this case. So this can also give you a very nice point of view or perspective into yourself and what you give value to. And I think it's very interesting to use it this way as a personal introspection tool. And then, of course, if you have some other categories like what you would like to improve, for instance, here. So I have a whole graph on the stuff that I think I would like to improve. I can also compare them with what was good to see if what I find good during the day is also something that I want to improve. So for instance, here it's in the improve, but not in what's good. And by the way, you can always, change here. So it's in the to improve part, but not in what's good. So I was writing a lot about finding a calm moment in the day, which I was not speaking about in what's good, but obviously I'm thinking about it when I'm thinking about what I want to improve in my life in general, that I need to find more calm moments during the day, during the work time. But I was not writing about them when I was actually having them. So this is also pretty interesting as an insight into yourself. And if you click here on this icon, then you swap the graph. So you swap the comparison, you see what was written in the what's good part, but not in to improve. And you see, so everything was with money was good, with working was good, but it was not in the to improve section. Also with meeting people and hanging out with people wasn't the good part, doesn't need to improve, and so on. So you can quickly see, how you can use this as an introspection tool and compare the different kinds of ideas that you're having about yourself, and then see, how you would like to move further. And of course, you can do the same with your research as well, just like I did now. If you have, let's say, the ideas on the fractal dynamics here, and then I have another graph which I made some days before that was about the book ideas I had. So I'm writing a book on network analysis and on all these approaches, and I just wrote down some ideas about what this book should be about, actually, right? And then I would like to compare these two graphs together. So again, I can use this feature. By the way, if I click here, I'm going to see the intersection between them. Here I see the differences. Now I'm interested in the differences. So I'm going to compare the ideas for the book with the ideas on fractal dynamics and see if there is any sort of strange difference in between them. And here I can see that what I have in the book ideas, but not in the ideas on fractal, there's quite a lot about change, relation, connectivity. I can click on those terms and see in which context I use them. So how to reconfigure the context network, changing relation, changing the basis of connectivity. So this is something I want to write about in the book, but that I didn't touch upon in the ideation process on fractals. And maybe this is something I should add, that in fact it's true that this fractal dynamics tool could be used to also help recontextualize ideas and to diversify perspectives. So this is more of a ideological idea maybe, but still quite interesting in relation to this particular study. So this is how it would work with the graph comparison feature. I will look at more questions and then go on further. Abdul is asking, for most research databases, you can obtain the topics, abstracts, and authors of scientific papers. Can Intronodos do citation analysis? Not yet, because then you need open access papers, and they don't always provide citations or references in the databases that we get. But this could be an interesting feature to add. I think with Pubmed we could do that. So if you look at the Zoom chat window, the other one, not the Q&A one, but the other one, you will find my email, and you can write to me and tell me more about what you want to do with this, and we can see how we can implement this feature. As there is an interest in this sort of analysis, it could be very easy for us to implement this ahead of the development queue. Luke is asking, can you display a dynamic view of how your diary changed day after day? Kind of small clip of how the graph of your diary changed through time. Yes, this is a very good question, Luke. Thank you. So for example, let's focus on what's good. Remove this stuff. You have two options. One is to go into the filter panel here, and then you see that now it's showing the whole time range. So that's from the end of November when I started in it to the middle of April when I last made an entry in it. And then what I can do is to select a small period and then kind of go like this to see how it evolved. I can also just drag one knob only, and then I can see what was changing. But here the problem is that I was irregular. So if I do this kind of scan, you see it's not changing really regularly, because at some point I added a lot, and then I started adding less and less, and then again there was some stuff towards the end added. So another approach that you could do, there's a really nice feature here, is that it shows you the evolution towards the final graph, and then you just do, let's say, with this speed, and then you can actually watch how your graph evolved. And as you can see, it's recalculating all the time also the main topical groups. So you can see gradually how the diary was evolving, what topics it was touching upon. And what happens here is actually that it's moving through the statements that you had automatically and showing you how it evolved over time. And this is a really interesting way to understand the dynamics of the discourse. By the way, we also want to work on integrating special graphs that would show you how certain key topics evolved over time. It's soon going to be added into trends, but for now you can watch it manually like this, you know. And then of course, if the speed is too high, you can always decrease it and relaunch. So then it would be slower, and you would have time to look into the evolution of the discourse over time. This is also a really good tool to use if you're importing something from Twitter, because then the time is quite more somehow have equal distances in between, you know, so it's more fluid there, and you will be able to see how the discourse on Twitter evolved over the past week. So for example, here I have the discourse on Twitter. I can turn this on. I don't have to press this button. I can just start scrolling, and then as I scroll, it's showing me only the statements that are in my view. So I can see how the discourse was evolving from now to the beginning of the week. So you can use this with all kinds of data. And if you have a CSV file or a spreadsheet with some data that has timestamps, you can also import it as well and use this dynamic analysis in the same way. Now I'm going to come back to the ideas, and now that we added some ideas into the network and we know what we're talking about more or less, now I will show you how you could then make them into something more coherent. So what you do is that you go to the interpret feature here. You see the graph, but you don't see any statements. Why? Because we will start now rewriting this text, but trying to make it more well-formed and better formed than the original ideas we had. the way to do it is usually to start from the main topics. It actually depends on the approach you want to take, but if you want to give from the very beginning a very good understanding of what you're writing about, it's nice to touch on the most influential nodes. So here I would say that we're talking about network analysis. We should also get these two words back. Okay, so we talk about analysis of discourse. This is an important topic, and the dynamics analysis. So how can we perform the dynamic analysis of a discourse? So that would be the main topic. You see the nodes that I mentioned in the statement, they're now shown gray on the graph. So it's showing me how much of the original discourse I cover with my rewritten text. Then I can say one of the possible approaches is to use fractal analysis to measure the discourse dynamics. Next statement. Okay, so now I also have these words covered gray. Then I can say that I can actually show more labels for all the nodes, make them proportional to the node size, increase them a little bit, make them the same color, so change the look a little bit so it's a bit more readable. Then I can say, okay, so this approach would allow us to stimulate higher level of diversity in a cognitive process and thinking. Okay, add this. You see diversity now is gray, thinking is gray, and process is gray. So it shows me how much my new text is entering into this existing discourse. It's almost like indicating a level of propagation of your new ideas into your old ideas, except that now you're really trying to make a well-formed text. So you're starting from the main terms, and then you're trying to expand them as a sort of benevolent infection into the rest of the network. Then we move on. I see that human movement is a pretty big topic, and also personality types. So I'm going to try to go now in this direction. I'm going to say that a recommendation algorithm could be used to improve cognitive dynamics based on the text's fractality using a similar approach as using an approach that is already applied in the study of human movement. We could analyze narrative network fractality and propose a certain score or a measure that could be used as an actionable advice by users. Okay, add this into the graph. As you can see, now we're covering quite a big territory of the original graph. And then we also have something about personality types, theory, and so on. So then you could expand it further in this direction, and so on. So this is how you would write the text, and then once you have the final text, then you click on the download tab and download the text data, and then it saves the text file, which you can then open and polish in the text editor to make it sound right and look good. So this is how this interpret feature works. You add the original graph, which is here, ideas, then click on the interpret feature, and then it's adding a metagraph, which you can see here. It's called metagraph now. So this is kind of like on top of the existing one. And it shows you how much your new discourse is covering the original one. This is also, by the way, a really great tool for learning. If you want to learn a new topic, you write some ideas in, and then you use the interpret feature to rewrite the text in a way that would cover the whole graph. in gray. It's like a game that you can play with yourself. And this would allow you to see how well you understand the discourse by recalling certain words and connections between them. If you click on the original here, you will go back to the original graph. If you click on interpret, then you go into the interpretation. You can also switch here. You can see only the graph that you created, the interpretation overlay, or what you just wrote. This is the original graph, and this is the difference. This is what you had in the ideas, but not yet in your interpretation. So this can be interesting because then you can see that, okay, you haven't written anything about your personality type and the ideation tool. So you can even click idea tool. So a tool to recontextualize ideas. So you can write then later the recommendation. System could be used as a tool to recontextualize your knowledge or to generate new ideas and explore how you could develop them further. Add this into the graph. Now you see that we covered this with the gray. Now we only have personality type and some technical stuff here about the mathematics of this approach. As you can see, very quickly you can get a general idea of how well you're covering the text. And if you click on view all statements, you see the overall structure and how much you propagated your new ideas on top of the original ones. You can, of course, also take an existing text, like a research that someone wrote, and write on top of that research. So you can use them many different ways, and this is a really great feature. I will now get back to the questions before we end. If you have anything to ask, please feel free to do it. So Robert is saying, it seems the system identifies importance of topics with the size of the circle. Does the system identify concepts, the relationship between frequencies, topics? Well, yes, it identifies, first of all, the most influential elements. This measure is based on between the centrality. So these are the nodes that have the highest influence. And the measure of between the centrality is explained in our support articles on the website. If you click here, you can actually read what that means, how this measure works in a little helper here. But basically, it's the nodes that connect the most diverse topics together. So they're not necessarily the ones that have most connections, but it's the ones that have most connections to the most diverse topics in the current discourse. So this is how their influence is identified, and then the more influential the node is, the bigger it will be on the graph. The topics on the other side are identified based on the modularity algorithm, which is also explained here if you click on the question mark. And this is basically the nodes that are more densely connected together than with the rest of the network. So for example, here you have a cluster of nodes that are more densely connected together than to the rest of the network. That's why they have a distinct color, and they will be also identified as a cluster on the graph, and they have a topic. And 15% here means that 15% of the nodes from the graph are in this topic. Then you have another topic here, which is dynamic network analysis. And this is another cluster. Those words tend to occur together. There is 24% of other nodes in them because there is more words in there, like kind, interested, reason, estimate, show, propagation, So all these words are in this graph, and this is why they're shown here with this color as a topic as well, and so on. And the influence here is based on how many nodes are in the network, are in the cluster. This is how it works. Creso is saying that he has to leave, but thank you. Yeah, thank you, Creso. Okay. Luke is asking, how do you represent negative sentence? In natural language, proximity doesn't mean semantic connection. Well, so this is an interesting question. It's kind of more like a philosophical one, because if I tell you don't think of a blue elephant, then you will think of a blue elephant. So even though there is a negation, we made a semantic connection between the items. We use the word think and the blue elephant. And then whether it was a negative connection or not, Infranodus cannot tell you. But what it can tell you is that those words were used in the same context. And this is very useful information as well. But of course, then you would have to click on those words. In this case, theory type, let's see, and if I wrote a negative sentence, then I would see that it was used in a negative context. So this is how it would work. Okay. If you have any more questions, please feel free to ask them. I will add our support portal into the chat, support.noduslabs.com, where you can always go and find some interesting case studies on the different applications of this research and how you can use the tool, and also the different network measures as well. Please feel free to check it out. In the meanwhile, I'm going to read a question from James, who wrote that, can I talk a little bit more in the practical application of the interpret feature? So I think I already explained how it works, but basically when you use the interpret feature, it depends on the kind of discourse that you want to build. So for example, if you were to write some poetry or prose, you don't have to start from the main influential notes. This is usually the style when you want to write a scientific article or a newspaper article, when you want your reader to understand directly what you're talking about. If you're writing an article which is, let's say, more like an essay, that you want to introduce several different topics, you're not interested in making a particular point, but you just want to lay out a certain vision or a field of discourse, then you could also start from the periphery. And this could also be a really interesting tool, that you say, like, okay, I'm going to start from machine learning, for instance, and I'm going to talk about how you can train a neural network based on different features here, and what kind of algorithm you could use, what kind of analysis you could apply, and how it could be also used in a recommendation algorithm. And then you could go from recommendation to here, and then from dynamics to fractal, analyzing, fractal, then talk about the methodology. So as you see, it would be more of a chronological narrative where you develop your idea without necessarily touching upon the most important subjects directly, but just passing through them. So it really depends on the style of the article that you want to write. But if you're writing something that you want to rank high in the search engines, then luckily or unfortunately, you have to start from the main terms that you're interested in. So for example, if I want the article to rank high on that dynamic discourse analysis, then I would always use these words at the beginning, at the first few sentences, and then I would go into the periphery, but always making sure that even if I am somewhere here, that I'm always mentioning the most important words over and over again, but in different contexts, so that Google understands that I'm adding something interesting to the discourse that no one else had added before. And of course, not forgetting about the Insight tab here, which has a lot of really interesting information on the network structure, and always shows you the structural gaps, also the two topics that you could connect with an interesting research question. So for example, here it's asking of the connection between the personality theory and how you can use the ideation tool to recontextualize knowledge. So not something very obvious, but if you manage to connect those two topics, then you will definitely add something really interesting to the discourse. So this is how it would be used. You just use the graph as an heuristic device to help you generate ideas. And if you don't understand how to use the graph in this way, because maybe there's too much information, you always have this feature here that will always give you a nice advice on what you could do next, or use the advice in the Essence tab or in the Insight tab in the Analytics panel. Okay, great. So I think we'll stop the session here. It's been already more than an hour. The next webinar might probably be on the feature of comparing different graphs together and comparing different contexts together. If this is something interesting to you, please let me know. Also, if you have any specific questions, don't hesitate to contact me using the support portal, and I'll be happy to answer them as well. If you have some interesting use cases you're working on and you would like to use Infranodus, and you would like to know more about the technical aspects of how it works, especially if you're writing a scientific paper, feel free to ask, and I'll be happy to explain all the details of the algorithm. And in the meanwhile, thank you very much for your time. Let me know if you're interested in more topics for later. And I will inform you when the next webinar will take place. This webinar was also streaming live on our YouTube channel. You can find it if you go to infranodus.com. And then you scroll to the very bottom, to the footer. You will be able to see the link to the YouTube channel where this webinar is already online. I'll just take a few days to add the time stamps to it, so you will be able to find the right parts quickly. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you very much again for joining in and for your wonderful questions. And I'll see you soon. Thank you very much. And